The first time I ever tasted porchetta in Rome, oh my God, incredible. It kind of took my breath away. A whole pig just laying on the counter, deboned, rolled up and sewn together, roasted until the skin is crispy and the meat is juicy and tender. I take one bite and suddenly I believe in heaven. This is one of Rome's most core and iconic foods. And while we won't be getting a whole pig, we can still make porchetta at home much easier than you think, and it happens to be the perfect centerpiece for your holiday dinner. This is porchetta. And of course, this recipe, like all of my recipes, is gonna be in my holiday plan of attack, my go-to resource for all of you to make sure you enjoy the holidays as much as I do when it comes to food. Family, that's I can't help with that. And now, of course, since we're not using a whole hog, this recipe is gonna start with pork belly. And today's Friday. I started this a couple days ago. So this is prep day. The beauty of this recipe is we can prep this maybe 4 or 5 days before we actually need to cook this. And the longer you wait, the skin of the pork belly just gets drier, which means it just gets better once it's cooked. First thing we gotta do, toast a couple of herbs. Here I've got some whole peppercorns and some whole fennel. Got a hot pan here. Just gonna add in the pepper and then roughly an equal amount, maybe a little less of the fennel. Tablespoon and a half. Right away, if the pan's hot enough, you're gonna start to smell an aromatic smell, all the flavors waking up. And we're just gonna get them into a mortar and pestle. And we're just gonna grind them up. Start by kind of cracking them. I kind of like to push from the side down towards the center. And then once they get cracked, you can just start to roll it around, grinding all the spices up as evenly as you can. You end up with about 1.5 tablespoons of black pepper and fennel. Now, to those core flavors, we're going to add some other wonderful flavors. First, we've got about 10 to 12 cloves of garlic. We're gonna get that in. And when it comes to salt, we're going to base that as a percentage of weight to the amount of weight in pork belly that we have. The pork belly today that we're going to be using is 5 pounds. 1.6% of that is gonna be 38 grams. So remember, the salt you add, you're gonna have to know the weight of the pork belly and then just do 1.6% of that. Ask the internet what that is in grams, but that's what you're gonna wanna do. Get that in there. Now, we're gonna add our pepper and fennel. Now I've got some fresh rosemary, maybe 2 to 3 stalks of rosemary. To that, 1 bunch of sage, just the leaves, 1 bunch of parsley. Here I've got some oregano leaves. I'm just gonna pull a few stems of those. And we've got some fresh thyme, so we're just gonna pull the leaves off of as well. To that, some lemon zest. Now, I've got these 2 small lemons, so I'm gonna use 2. If you've got a bigger one, I would just use 1. And to get the maximum zest out of it, you kinda just start at the top, run it down, and you're able to get most of the zest off the surface. And finally, usually you add some chili flake in there, but I'm just gonna go ahead and add about 3/4 tablespoon of Calabrian chili. Pulse it. Push down the sides. We just want to get it nice and fine so it evenly distributes into the pork. It should smell nice, bright, fresh, herbaceous. That's what you're looking for, an herb crumb. Now onto the pork belly. This is an example of a shape of pork belly not ideally suited to make porchetta. I'm friends with my butcher. I can special order things, make sure they set aside a specific piece. And they did that for me the first time. At some point, you're at the whim of what the producer and the animal offers you. And so I've got this. And now we're gonna make this work, but I do have others properly prepped, which I'm gonna show you the difference, right? So now first, you're gonna look for anything from about a 6 to 8 pound pork belly with the skin on. And you wanna ask the butcher, I need it rectangular, as square and rectangular as possible, rather than long and narrow like this. And you're gonna see why that's important. So the first thing we wanna do is use one of these things. This has little needles that stick out of it, and it acts to sort of poke holes in the skin. And those little micro holes, those are going to create an escape hatch for the fat to sort of pour out of and sort of base that skin and get it nice and tender. So I'm just gonna bash it. Now that that's out of the way, I'm going to cut this in half so it's easier to work with. So if you got an 8 pound pork belly, you cut that into 2 4-pound pieces. Ideally, you want a pork belly that looks more like this, roughly the same width as length. So now here we are with one side. Now, even though we poked it, there's one thing we can do that's kind of nice. And it's gonna create a pattern and help the fat render. Is just, we're gonna do slices across, right? And we're not gonna do the other way. Otherwise, the string kind of gets stuck when we tie it. So now there's two ways to do this. You can either roll it long and thin, like this, or short and thick, like this. I'm gonna show you both ways. And of course, a traditional porchetta is served a whole hog. The next level is a big pork belly and a pork loin. And you stuff the pork loin in the pork belly. Those two things result in too big a pieces of meat, I feel is respectable to serve on Christmas. The sole pork belly porchetta is the most approachable, the cheapest, the easiest to deal with, roll up, tie up, and the most practical for at home for the Christmas dinner table. First way we're gonna show you, we're gonna do the thick but short porchetta. So what that means is I'm gonna lay it flat and then I'm gonna start to butterfly open the long end. So I'm gonna get down with my knife, find like a little bit above the halfway point and begin slicing and slowly peeling away until we open it like a book while still keeping it attached to the bottom of the pork. So there, you see how it's gonna work, right? I'm gonna roll this up just like that. Before we do that, we gotta stuff it. So I'm gonna go down with a little bit of the stuffing and I wanna rub in a light layer across the entire thing. You don't want too much, but there is all that salt in there that you wanna make sure you kinda rub into the pork to season it. So now I'm just gonna take where that flap is and very tightly roll it up. Just gonna clean up the board. I wanna keep that skin really kinda clean and isolated. Now, as you can see, this works. It's just for a much smaller situation. Final step is to tie it. So I'm gonna go down into the middle. And very simply, I'm just going to do a basic knot, but I'm gonna loop it around twice. So it's a triple knot. I'm gonna go down the side just to kind of get the knot away from the presentation top. And I'm gonna tighten it. Then we're gonna tie another triple knot and then secure it. Then go to either side of it. And the more you do these closer to each other, the more even you're gonna get the porchetta at the end. I'm gonna cut off the excess string. And then you've got beautiful little pork belly for, I don't know, 4 people, 5 people. We're gonna set that off to the side and then work on the other style. We're gonna go the long way. One other thing you gotta ask the butcher for is a leaner piece of pork belly. You could score it again, but we're gonna try this one without scoring it. So again, gonna open it up like a book. Being very careful you don't cut through any of the sides of the pork. And as you can see, this is a much fattier side, so I'm just gonna trim off some of that fat. And then again, season that inside. And then just like we did before, gonna roll it up. And when you do it this way, you're not gonna totally encase it in the skin. Some of the meat's gonna be at the bottom, but you're gonna get a much longer, thinner pork belly, or porchetta. And then same deal. Go towards the center first, tight knot, another triple knot. Continue tying up, making sure that that skin is nice and tight. There's no crimps in it, there's no wrinkles. You see, this one has more of like a shell around it, doesn't completely encase it. Still a nice porchetta, just thin and long. Now, in their own right, these are perfectly fine porchettas. Can't you see how like the shape of the pork belly that we got lends itself to not the ideal shape and size of a porchetta? However, this is more my speed. Same sort of width you get when you roll it the long way, however, it's just not as big of a piece of meat, might not satisfy as many people. Same thing here. It's a little thinner and longer, but this is still long and thicker. And as you can see, these were prepped 3 days ago. This skin is really beautiful and dry. It's starting to get firm and nice. This is the secret. We need this skin to be as dry as possible. But this is the difference between getting the right piece of meat and getting maybe a less ideal piece of meat. And I'm gonna get these into the fridge so they can dry out. These have been in the fridge for 3 days and you could go ahead and cook them like this. I'm gonna go for even more drying out of the skin. So I'm gonna let these go another couple days, which is nice. So you don't have to prep this Christmas Eve. You could literally prep this, when is Christmas this year? Christmas is a Thursday. You can prep this on Sunday. Let it dry out in a fridge or your second fridge. Easy peasy, your main course is basically taken care of. Now, today is Friday. And these pork bellies, these porchetta, I prepped Monday. And as you can see, that skin has darkened. It's browned a bit. That's a sign of the skin being effectively dried out. And that's exactly what you're looking for. If it's still a little white, which you can kind of see under the strings, and you can kind of see underneath a little bit, like that's still dried out, but how dark this skin is before you cook it is really gonna determine how well that skin crisps up. And now there's two ways we can approach this, and we're going to show and try both. Now, outside of preparing it and the seasoning and all of that, there's two real tricks we really use to cook this properly, right? The first one was to dry that skin out, and we gave it the better part of a week. And you could probably let this go a day longer. The next thing we need to do is at some point during this cook, introduce this to high heat. And we're gonna do that two ways. First, the high heat in the beginning. The second one, the high heat at the end. We're gonna see which one yields the best result. So I'm gonna set this in the fridge and we're gonna get this guy into the oven. No oil, no nothing. We've got a 425 degree oven preheated and we're gonna roast it at that high temperature for about 30, 45 minutes. Now, I know I said 425, but after further consideration, I think 450 is the right temp, and with convection if your oven has it. That high heat is going to help render the fat under the skin, and once that fat starts rendering, it almost starts to fry that leathery skin into a puff. I gotta add some water to the bottom of the pan just cause the juice from the pork belly started dripping and burning. Just use a clean sheet tray when you start this cook so it doesn't burn. Now, that skin that doesn't puff up may stay crunchy, but just not as tender, more like glass. And all we're really doing now is waiting for the skin to darken and puff to our desired taste. This route gives you control. You cook that skin to the puffy and crispiness that you want now, but once you lower the temperature, it's not gonna get much crispier or puffier. But rendering the fat is essential. If you've ever had pork skin that is kind of sticky in your mouth and your teeth, it's because the skin is crispy, but the fat's not fully rendered underneath it. Crisp skin will have that fat fully rendered till there's almost a space between the meat and the skin. I'm gonna take it out, but I could have left it in longer, and I'd recommend just doing this stage of the pork carefully. This is going to determine how amazing that skin's gonna be. Stick a thermometer into the center of the pork belly so we can monitor when it's done, and then we can also get that second pork belly on. This is gonna start slow, and then we're gonna finish it on high heat to see the difference. And then we're gonna lower the heat down to 325. I'm just gonna monitor this until it hits around 100, anywhere really between like 170 and 200. You kinda don't want this to be like falling apart shreddable. You want it kind of like on the edge where it melts in your mouth, but there's nothing really tough about it. I'll probably shoot for around 185, 190. Now, what's nice about starting a pork belly low and slow is it gives extra time and heat to further dry that skin out before crisping it up. We're just gonna double check the temp in the pork belly, make sure I'm not in any fat pockets. Looks like we're about 155, and I like to pull mine around 185, 190. Right now, I'm gonna check the temp of the pork belly that's been going low and slow, and it's at around 130. I think that's the right amount of time to fully crisp up that skin. So I'm gonna turn the heat back up to 450, and I'm gonna let that bigger pork belly stay in there while it heats up, just to give it some little extra crisp. And once I hit 185, I'm gonna pull it out of the oven, remove the thermometer, and then place it into the other pork belly so I can monitor its temp when it's in the oven. It's about 190 in the center. Took out the thermometer, placed it into the other one. That's at about 140. We're just gonna try and crisp up that skin. One thing I will say though is I probably would have let this sit in the blasting heat in the beginning a little bit longer, just because some parts down here are crisp, but they're like a little bit not like a cracker. So I really want you to allow in that first step, that crackling to really make its way all the way down here. So we'll let this cool while the other porchetta finishes. Now that second one's been in that high heat now for a minute, and as you can see, we're getting a lot of that bubbling and puffing in the skin, and it's extraordinarily crispy. To me, this skin is looking better than the first one. It's around 175, and we can let that go for another 10 degrees before we pull it. And there's our second porchetta, and if I may say so myself, incredibly gorgeous looking skin. Slight puffing around the edges so you get that puffy crisp, but it also is really just like glass. Now this one is the one where the skin does not wrap all the way around. The skinnier, longer one. But because the skin doesn't wrap around, it sort of ensures a maximum crispy, whereas on this one, there's a little, still very crisp, but has some soft spots to it. Now, before tasting either of them, here are my thoughts about the techniques. I really like the first technique because I can then control the skin. Whether I'm using the smaller one or the bigger one, I can then dial the skin into exact crispiness I want, make sure it kind of creeps all the way down, make sure we got some of this nice popping and bubbling that we got on this one that we didn't so much get on this one, but we still got a blistering happening. And then you slow the heat down and just cook it to the temperature you want, and this is good to go. Also, if you've got guests coming, when you blast this at a higher heat, there's lots of smoke, and this one is done last. So if you don't want your guests inhaling smoke from your oven, the hot and fast in the beginning and then slow is probably the way you want to go. But what I like about this is it's time in the oven to slowly render the fat and to allow that skin to get maximum dried. And then once you hit it, you get that blistering that's really nice on the outside. Gonna let that cool, and then we're gonna make some sandwiches. It's not what I'm gonna serve on holiday, but I gotta make porchetta sandwiches, I'm sorry. Now, you're gonna need a serrated knife. Trying to cut through this with a normal knife is just gonna kind of harm it. Oh my God. Now let's analyze. Notice the rendered skin, puffed and crisp, and underneath, there's no real fat. Meat is tender. Let's see how it tastes. Look at my fingers. Incredible. Not fall apart, but tender. We've got one, let's see the other. Now let's give the big one a taste. I think they're both great. It's salty, herby, fatty, tender. I will say the skin on the second one is better. If you tear off a little bit of the skin that isn't fully rendered, a little tough and a little sticky. See, now this one, it's a little bit more puffy. And here's what we're gonna do. Just don't get much better than that. If I'm cooking this again, surprisingly, I didn't think I would choose this. I'm going with the long and the skinny one, where the skin does not completely encase it, and I'm actually gonna cook it the reverse way. I find the meat overall was more succulent, it was juicier, it was more tender, and of course that skin is much better. I hope you enjoyed this. Again, if you like this recipe, it's gonna be in my holiday plan of attack. It's got this and all of my recipes, about over 60 of them for Christmas and Thanksgiving. Everything from sides, desserts, mains, appetizers, you name it, it's got it. And I've gotten so many reviews from people who said it has actually worked within their family and it's now part of their tradition. Link's gonna be down in the description. That's all that I have today. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care of yourself and go feed yourself.